how do you feel? I know that people make this association with you because I've seen it when we have guests come on. We have a thread on our subreddit and people post their questions, and I've seen it before. People associate you with pandering to like white supremacists, or worse. I've even seen the suggestion that you are a white supremacist yourself. So how do you feel about that? And that seems to be like a somewhat widely held.
Well, I don't know what to think
opinion.
about that. It's completely ridiculous. Like, for example, I'm an honorary member of a Native American tribe. I got inducted last year. I have an Indian name, a Native American name. Like, it's completely preposterous. And I've been buying carvings from this like isolated tribe in northern Vancouver on northern Vancouver Island for 15 years, you know, and so, and I've had it's preposterous. And I mean, there's evidence that it's preposterous. And the evidence is that I have 260 videos on YouTube and they must total at least 600 hours, something like that. And, you know, by now people have been over them essentially with a fine-tooth comb. Virtually everything I've said in my classes to my students in the last 25 years is on video. And so if there was anything in there that was even remotely associated with that, it would come out. But it's even worse than that because it's actually the opposite. Because the reason I've been teaching students since 1993 about the Holocaust and what happened in the Soviet Union, you know, and I've been trying to make them understand how that's associated with the unwillingness to accept personal responsibility and educating them as deeply as I can about the horrors of exactly that sort of thing. Like, it's obsessed me ever since I was very, very young. And so not only is it not true, it's anti-true. Anti-true. It's seriously untrue.
So this is something that I think generally people don't think about, stuff like this. And my next question for you is, it seems that more and more in today's society and just the societies in the world today, people are more depressed, more anxious, more suicidal than ever before. Is that a symptom of something unusual going on in our society? Is it just people that are more comfortable talking about it now? What is it? Why are so many people depressed?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I think at least part of it is the complexity of our society. It isn't certain how the future is going to lay itself out, and it isn't certain that what you knew in the past is going to be sufficient for you to move forward into the future. So there's lots of opportunity, but it's very complex. And it's not easy to keep up in our world. You know, like if you look around the world, you might think, well, the happiest people are those where the standard of living is the highest. That's actually not the case.
Right.
And you think, okay, but why wouldn't that be the case? It's like, what do you want? Malaria and death at 40? Obviously not. But then you think, okay, what's the price you pay for a high standard of living? Well, that's easy. You virtually always sacrifice the present for the future. You're always working. I mean, you guys, you're fairly influential and you've got this good thing going, but like it could crash at a moment's notice. You better keep your eye on it. And every day you're thinking, okay, this has to be done and this has to be done and this has to be done. And it pays off. I mean, you have a nice studio and I would presume a reasonably comfortable life, but it's not like you're not running on a treadmill to keep that going. And so that's security and it's health, but it isn't necessarily happiness, and it's certainly not necessarily freedom from anxiety. Sure. And I would say most people in the modern world, weirdly enough, have far too much to do. You know, 2 career families and a couple of kids. It's like, man, you're done. That's 60 hours a week of flat out work. Yep. So, and that can be too much. And then I also think, because our society is philosophically unstable, and that's sort of reflected in this polarization, is that people are doubtful about whether their lives have any meaning, for example. You know, well, why bother? What's the use of it? Who cares? It's like, what difference is it going to make in a million years, you know? And life is hard, and if you just have a nihilistic viewpoint, then it's easy to be swamped by doubts and existential angst and all of that. And like, I think that's a mistake, because I think that your life can be very meaningful. It's proportionate to the responsibility that you take on. And you can learn that by watching when you're engaged in the world, you know, and what works to sort of protect you from feelings of isolation and doom. You know, and a lot of the lectures I have on YouTube are about exactly that. So I think part of it is the complexity of the modern world.
Yeah.
I also can't shake the sneaking suspicion that it has something to do with our diet.
Really?
Well, you know, I saw this. We know that obesity is like skyrocketed.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and probably the reason for that, it's not exactly certain. There might be complicated reasons for it, but certainly one of the reasons is that people eat far too many carbohydrates.
Right.
You know, I saw this video from World War II about and in one of the scenes they showed all these men in New York lining up to be inducted, and it's like, you know, 20 blocks of guys with no shirts on standing in line to be inducted. Every single one of them was bone thin.
Do you
Every
think,
single
you think
one.
it's the insecurity and the negative feelings that come with being overweight, or the actual food?
No. I think there's something wrong with what we're eating.
Interesting.
And, yeah, I mean, there's more and more evidence that dietary sensitivity, for example, is linked to conditions like schizophrenia.
Really?
And so, yes.
Watch out for
yes.
that bread, y'all.
Well, and also your gut bacteria, turns out, which you have a lot of, you have about 100 times more bacterial cells in your body than human cells, which is really quite a freaky thing to think about. Luckily, they're quite tiny, because otherwise you'd be like a giant amoeba,
Yes.
you know. But the gut biome produces a lot of neurochemicals, and so it does play an integral role in the regulation of your mood, which is also a very strange thing.
I've been following that, just how bacteria is starting to play more in human health, like probiotics and stuff like this can regulate your mood. That's so freaky.
Yeah, it is. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, one possibility is that, well, let's say you eat a lot of carbohydrates and sugar. Okay, so what happens is that you grow bacteria in your gut that
Right.
really like carbohydrates and sugar.
Right.
Well, so then you think, well, I'm always having cravings for carbohydrates and sugar. It's like you're having the cravings, you think. Well, maybe not. Maybe what's happened is that, you know, through a Darwinian process, you've encouraged the growth of bacteria that really like sugar and carbohydrates.
And you think
and
that same bacteria is messing with people's mood? Maybe.
Yes, it could, and it's also messing with their cravings.
That's.
I mean, we're really walking oceans, you know, like we're big creatures. I
Yeah.
mean, we're not big compared to like a Douglas fir or the sun, but like we're
sure.
pretty big creatures, and
Yeah.
and we are liquid. Most of us is liquid, and you know, if you saturate yourself with carbohydrates and sugar, then you are invaded by the bacteria that live on those things, and so that's not necessarily so good for you.
We ask all of our guests if they have ghost stories, supernatural experiences, UFO sightings, anything like that. You don't need to get too deep. And if you don't, you can say no. That's perfectly fine. But do you have any supernatural experiences? You do? All right.
You do.
Do you mind sharing it?
I have two.
Okay.
Oh.
I've got to figure out which. I'll share you the one that's funnier, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so I went to Nashville and to a scientific conference, and I looked online to book a hotel. Booked a hotel, and then I went down to Nashville, and my former graduate advisor was coming, staying in the same hotel, but he didn't come with me. And a student of mine who had become a professor was also coming into town. Okay, so I got to this hotel. And I didn't know that Nashville, that had been hollowed out, like the downtown wasn't good. There were lots of abandoned buildings. It was pretty crime-ridden, not a fun place. They're trying to put it back together, but the hotel that I'd rented was sort of in the middle of this, and it was a 70s hotel. And so it's kind of in a sketchy neighborhood. So that was interesting. So I walked in, but the lobby was beautiful. Like they'd completely redone it. There were replicas of like Renaissance paintings on the roof. It was all marble. It was really quite impressive. And then right next door to the lobby, there was this huge restaurant that probably sat 300-400 people. Really big restaurant. And I looked in the restaurant. There wasn't a single person there. And there was this steam table, you know, full of stainless steel trays, huge trays. And all there was like mac and cheese and green beans. And you know what green beans are like if they're like soaking in hot water for like an hour. It's like, you don't want to eat those things. So that's all there was. And I thought, that's kind of weird. And there was no people in there. No staff, no people. I thought, that's weird. So anyways, I checked in and I went up and the rest of the hotel really hadn't been fixed up since the 1970s. So it smelled like smoke. The carpets were old. I went into my room. It was kind of ratty, but it was okay. Put my computer on the bed, put my luggage on the bed, and called my graduate student and went out to have some barbecue. So that's fine. So then I came back and got into my room, and my graduate student came along. This was Colin, the guy who invented that personality test. And I walked in, and all the drawers in the cabinets were open. Like, so there was a bureau, 4 drawers and 4 drawers side to side. And there was the little table between the beds, and there was a desk. And all of the drawers were open. And not just a little bit open, like completely open. But my computer was still on the bed, and so was the luggage. And I thought, well, that's weird. I didn't open those damn drawers. And if someone came in here to steal something, why didn't they take the computer? That'd be the logical thing to do. So we closed all the drawers, and then we thought, well, maybe a big truck went by, and like, that's a pretty stupid hypothesis, but we couldn't think of anything else. So we kind of shook the cabinet to see if we could get the doors to open. We'd shut all the drawers. And when we turned around, the damn drawer on the desk was open again. So we shut that. So I had opened, the drawer was open in the middle little cabinet between the beds too, and there was a Gideon Bible in there, and it was open, and it was open to the line that says, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And I thought, well, that was pretty interesting. I closed that, closed the door. And we talked for a while. Graduate student left, and I thought, I didn't really think much of it. I thought it was weird, but whatever, it was weird. So then I went to sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up, and I thought, that wasn't just weird. That was really weird. It was like someone was in my room, right? Because otherwise, why were the drawers open? And why were they open? Like, what's going on?
And the Bible was open.
Well, and so the next morning, I went downstairs to this black girl behind the counter, and I walked up, and I said, look, I don't want to alarm you, but I went out last night, and when I came back into my room, all the drawers were open. I think someone was in my room. And she said, I don't want to alarm you, but we know this place is haunted. And I always come to work with a baseball bat. And I thought, oh, well, of all the responses I thought I would get.
Is that more terrifying?
Well, it was just, it was surreal, right? And it was like a movie moment. It was ridiculous. Right. So I went and talked to my graduate advisor, an older guy who had been in the hotel, and he said that the night before he had taken a shower, and when he came out, there were 2 drawers open in his room. And so
these damn drawer opening doors.
Okay. And I'll finish this off with the other weird part of this story, which isn't quite so ghostly, but is also extremely weird, and it just gives you a sense of the place. So we went for breakfast the next day, and I took 2 different graduate students for breakfast. We went to this restaurant right next door, and there was no one there. And there was no staff.
The same one in the hotel.
Same one. Same one. Very fancy. Green marble. Like, it might have been quite a place back in the 1970s. So we're sitting there and sitting there and sitting there and sitting there for like half an hour. And finally this waiter walks by, and we stop and we say, well, do you have any menus? He says, well, we don't have menus. And I said, well, what do you mean you don't have menus? He said, you can just order anything you want.
What?
And I said, well, you mean anything? He said, yeah, you just order anything you want, and we'll cook it.
So weird.
Okay, so we ordered eggs and breakfast, right? Well, we'll have breakfast. How would that be? So then we're sitting there talking, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited. It was like 45 minutes, 50 minutes.
Nobody's there.
No one's there.
No
one's there. Nothing's happening.
Yeah.
Finally, he comes out with these plates, and he puts the plate down in front of me, and it's quite nicely garnished, and there's 2 eggs on it. And they are, I swear, they are raw.
What?
They have not been cooked. And I looked at him, and I looked at the plate, and it was the same with the other 2 people that were there. They gave them eggs that had just been put on the plate.
What?
He said, well...
Cracked right on.
It wasn't like they were undercooked. They weren't white with some clear on the top. They were raw.
Right.
But nicely decorated.
Sure.
I thought,
That's so weird.
What the hell? What the hell? We said, okay, look. Like, we called him back, or we said, these eggs are raw. They're not cooked. It's like, what's going on? He said, oh, we'll fix that. So then he went off into the kitchen, and it was like 20 minutes later, and he brought it back, and they were cooked. And so we'd been in there for like 2 hours by that point, late for the conference. And I was laughing to my students. I said, well, the only thing that could possibly top that off is if it was ridiculously expensive. So then he brought the bill. It was like $83.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, well. So
But was he a ghost?
I don't know. Well, he wasn't a waiter, that's for sure. And he certainly wasn't a cook.